Why don't each of you introduce yourselves? Because we'll be working closely with, especially Mark, I think.
Pierre Chenet with LSO, and I'll be helping Mark with Zoom and other logistics.
Mark Knotts. I'm Secretary for Minerals and Ag, and this is my wife Denise, and she is the support secretary. So that means if one of us is sick or whatever, then she'll take over that position in whatever committee it is. But
And yes, I am Denise Knotts, and I'm the support secretary for the House. And I thank you, Chairman Eklund, for allowing me to sit in on the meetings and learn the ropes. And I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you. Now we'll call the meeting to order. Do a roll call, please.
Representative Allemand. Present. Representative Allred.
Here.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Conrad.
Here.
Representative Crago.
Here.
Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Slagle.
Present.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here. Thank you. So committee, I'm going to go through a couple things that my secretary asked me to get done. Make sure you filled out the form. I think everybody already has, so he's got your cell phone number, and I have those numbers. Thank you for getting them to me. Don't take your folders. These things here stay with the secretary. And he's already had to go retrieve them from other committees that he's helped with. I guess I would start by saying that I think one of the most important things that we'll realize as we do this work for the people is that we're not alone. We've got a whole committee. As I said, all of you have probably prepared all of your lives to be sitting at the chair you're at. You'll have input, you'll have ideas. Don't take offense when somebody changes your bill a little bit, because that may be what you need to get a good bill better so you can get it across the finish line. And we depend on each other to do it. I shared with the whole bunch one time that in my continuing studies and what have you, one of the things that's always mentioned is decisions made by a group or a committee are almost always better and more inclusive, done by several people, and I believe that'll happen here. I have no doubt it'll happen here. So with that, I'm going to go into some rules. What we'll be doing will be very unnatural. Even if you're used to Robert's rules, you probably didn't follow them real closely. If it ever, I'm going to be one of the greatest violators of the whole thing. Robert's rules will be used here, and Mason's will be used out when we're on the floor. And that one is way different yet. But if ever I get out of the rules and the process that I need to, if I skip anything, somebody call it to my attention right away so we don't skip over it and then have to come back the next meeting and do damage control. Let me think. So one of the things, and I'll cut some slack on it, is probably try to go through the chairman with everything that you want to say. And be kind and courteous to the public, always. I think if most of the public's like I am, you're a little bit nervous to get up in front of groups and what have you. In fact, I think the greatest fear most people have is public speaking and getting out in front of folks. So we want the public to be as comfortable as they can when they come in, and their testimony's valuable. There's all of it. So I'm going to go through a little of how the thing works. We'll start in with the bill for consideration, and we'll have the sponsor of the bill come forward. In this case, it'll be the Ag Committee. Comments by the sponsors, experts and other people that come, and I will not do it this way. Sometimes you want those in favor of the bill or those against. I'm just going to have people come forward and we'll get all the public testimony we can in whatever order. And then we'll have a final chance for public comment and probably close the bill to public comment. I'm not real firm on that because there will be times when we get into a conversation, we need to pull the agency back up or people that are experts on it to come forward and help us. So I'll say, committee, what's your pleasure as we close public comment? And you'll move to recommend that we pass the bill, and it'll be seconded, and we'll discuss it and work the bill. This was an interim committee bill. This is a whole different committee. John and I are the only ones that have been on this committee. So we kind of start over, and this bill is yours now. We can alter things as you see, as it's needed. And that isn't unusual. I've been in the House for 12 years now, and every term it turns over about a third. This time it was half. So anyway, whole new committee. The bill is yours now, ours. So we'll modify it as we think it should be modified. Let me think here. What else was I going to say? We'll get into it as suggestions were made by the public. Write those things down. We'll do them so we have kind of a clear idea what we want to do for amendments. Then there'll probably be a call for the question and then a roll call vote on the bill. Any questions? All right. Did I cover it all that you can think of? Okay. Well, our first bill for consideration is House Bill 16. I'm going to do a little explaining on some of this since we're the sponsors of it. We work quite a lot in state lands. We've done that for a couple of years now, committee. And the reason that we've done it is it started with vacant lands, and now we're trying to work on policy that will help the state lands office with their decision-making processes. And if we get that policy really clear and they can follow something, then we'll get out of some of the problems that we found that we've had over the last few years, discrepancies and whatever's going on. This first bill is probably the easiest of the ones we'll be doing, and I hope we continue with state lands. And the reason is to help the state of Wyoming and help the state lands office with their decision-making process. So the first one, the reason it's kind of easy, the way state lands work, the improvements are done by the person who's leasing the land and who has the lease. So there might be corrals in we're talking probably more about the actual surface leasing, fences, wells, possibly houses. There's sometimes barns and houses on state lands. And we found that the valuation of the property that's on it, which the leasing, if he were to reassign the lease or whatever, that would be the value of those improvements would be paid back to the leasee. And so that's why it's important to have a valuation on those. And I'll go through whenever we get to we've got crossed out and underlined things. Whenever you get to these underlined or red, they're red, they're not red on ours. Those are the new parts. The other parts are existing law. So we're trying to raise it from 2,000 to 4,000. When we had this discussion committee, I don't know, we could have raised it from 2,000 to 100,000. That just costs so much anymore. And it doesn't limit you on how to $4,000. It just says you can put 4,000 on without the approval of the state lands. You correct me when you get up here if I say anything wrong. If you needed to do a $100,000 improvement, then you would go through the state lands office and they would guide you through it. So it's switched from 2,000 to 4,000 several places on page 2. And that, I think, covers most of the bill. So on the last page 4, I've had some questions on this, but we'll work the bill and maybe change some of the wording the way we have it. The depreciated value of the improvements, unless a different value is agreed to between the owner and of the improvements and the new leasee thereof, finally determined by the board in accordance with its rules and regulations. I think I already explained how that part works. So I'd like to, if you had any questions for me, you could do that now, but I think we're going to bring people up that are well-versed on what we're trying to do here. And let's start probably with Jason. Jason Crowder. Well, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Jason Crowder. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investment. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and welcome all the new committee members to this committee. We obviously the Ag Committee is our oversight committee, so we get to work quite a bit with each other, and I look forward to working with each of you going forward. Mr. Chairman, I also wanted to start off by commending you on your secretary and your support secretary. I don't know that you could have found two better people for this job. Both the Knottses have helped raise me in my career, and I look up to them considerably. Mark worked with the office for quite a while before he moved to ETS and then later retired, and was a great mentor to me. And I actually share a birthday with Mrs. Knott, so we're very close and tied in many ways, and they're going to be great support staff for you. I also wanted to introduce to you our new Assistant Director for our Trust Land Management Division, Holly Kennedy. Holly's relatively new to our office. I'm not sure if she's hit the 1-month mark yet, but she's a fantastic asset and a great addition to us. She's a great ag background and will be a great asset going forward. Director Scoggin also sends her regrets for not being here. We have a board meeting going on right now, and as you all are aware, we serve the State Board of Land Commissioners and the State Loan and Investment Board, and they're meeting right now, and she's managing that meeting. So you get the B team, and so I apologize for that up front, but I'll do the best I can. To address the bill specifically, we have worked with the committee throughout the interim on this topic, and we'll offer some support for the bill and some changes that might make it a little bit better going forward. But as the chairman mentioned, the change to the minimum amount needed for approval is an appropriate change for the times that we're in. The last time this amount was changed was back in 1997, I believe it was, and it was $750 to $2,000. We've run an economic analysis on $4,000, and if you average out inflation from 1997 to today, it actually hits right at $4,000. So we're keeping pace with the, I think, the original intent of this legislation for approval as we go forward. So that's a good change and a good update. It's important to note that the value of these improvements is critical in a lease life or a leasing scenario. As the chairman mentioned, there are times when this value becomes extremely important, and a lot of the time during the lease term where it's just a number that we keep track of. As the chairman mentioned, all improvements are built by the lessee, they're owned by the lessee, and if for whatever reason the lessee is either taken off the lease, sells the lease, or we sell the land to somebody else, then those improvements need to have a value, and that lessee needs to be compensated for that value. So one of the changes that I think would make this bill a little bit better and be in line with what we have done internally as far as analysis goes is to change up the definition of contributory value like the definition or like the bill does. Contributory value is a very hard thing for our appraisers to understand. It's a very hard thing to define. The statute, existing statute does define it as the increased value of the lease or the land when the improvements are considered. It's not a comparable analysis. It's not a replacement type of a cost. It's what does the actual improvement contribute to the value of that lease? As we talk through the interim, that's a very subjective value, depending on who's actually valuing it. Somebody coming in may have no value to that improvement compared to the person who built it. So it's appropriate to change that definition to something that's more in line with appropriate compensation back to the lessee who built that improvement. And a depreciated value is certainly one of the most commonly used market-driven type values in the industry right now, and so we would support that. We have worked on this definition with our appraising staff, and they obviously will be in charge of trying to determine this appraisal or this value if we get into one of these situations, and not solely in charge of determining that value, but working with the owner of those improvements or the lessee as we're determining that value. What we've done is we have maybe more clarified that definition from depreciated value to more of a depreciated market value. And that gives you a place to start, the market value of that improvement. And then you can depreciate it based on its condition, its age, quality, and things like that as we go forward. And so what we'd like to do is offer you a change where you would amend this bill to not just say depreciated value, but also say depreciated market value. We've also inserted or have the ability to offer a definition for that. The draft bill appropriately crosses out the definition of contributory value, and we can offer you a definition for depreciated market value, and I'm happy to read that in, and I can give it to you, Mr. Chairman, in writing at a later time. I'll read it to you right now, and you can handle it however you'd like. But basically, depreciated value means the market value of the lessee's improvements at the time of sale after the useful life of the improvement is considered. So happy to, I don't have that in writing for you right now, but I can offer it.
Okay,
by that
so a
future.
question I would have, so it wouldn't necessarily be just depreciated, it could be appreciated value as well. It's the value as it is market value.
Mr. Chairman, very likely, and I'm not an expert in the value of improvements. That's why we have an appraisal staff. Typically, these are depreciated over time because they're utilized and they're not brand new forever, not like land would appreciate.
Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, if I could, when we thought about this idea, we found that not only in 36.5.111 does this change need to occur, but there's also a reference to it in 36.9.105. And I am not sure of the process of adding another part of statute into a bill. But where you are talking about it solely talks about the situation where a new lessee comes onto a piece of land. So if the old lessee were to lose his lease for whatever reason, he didn't make a payment, he did some other infraction against the lease terms, and we had to cancel his lease and bring in a new one, This part of statute talks about the new lessee coming on and compensating the owner of those improvements for the contributory value or the depreciated market value of those improvements. In 36.9.105, that is where we talk about if the state were to sell a piece of land and there are improvements on there, it talks about contributory value in that piece of statute too. So it would make sense to adjust both of them at the same time. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more. We're all beginning this legislative session, so I apologize. The term new lessee is utilized in the draft bill. And I'm going to try to find that for you in page number.
Or line 4?
Yes. Line 4, yes. At this stage, when we are trying to determine who should pay and how much they should pay, we don't have a lessee on the line. We have an applicant. So it would make sense to change the term new lessee on line 4 to just applicant.
Okay.
Could you repeat that again,
Yes, sir.
Director?
On page 4, line 4, the term new lessee, strike new lessee and replace it with applicant.
Okay, questions, committee? Okay, I think Representative Slagle was wanting to get in a little bit earlier. Go ahead, Alan.
Question, Mr. Chairman, question for Jason, Director of the State Lands. Anyway, my question was, as Chairman Eklund had mentioned earlier, I think the idea of maybe appreciated or depreciated value would be good because there are some assets or improvements that we put on land that do appreciate over time, even though they have had use, that their value continues to remain the same or go up. I mean, and one of them I was would be like a reservoir that you build on the land to retain water. I mean, that really doesn't depreciate over time, and the cost of rebuilding that at a later time is more. I mean, that's not one that you're going to be able to pick up and remove if you don't get paid for it either. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman and Representative Slagle, I think that's a great point. The definition that I offered, and I know that you don't have it in front of you and I'll provide it, but it does say the depreciated market value means the market value of the lessee's improvement at the time of sale after the useful life of the improvement is considered. So it's not at the time of construction, but at the time of sale, which could take into account your appreciation component there.
So yes, go ahead, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Deputy Director. Good to see you. So my question is similar to Representative Slagle's, which is when we start looking at this definition, I mean, are we overcomplicating it? Doesn't the term market value intrinsically include depreciation? Do we need to actually use that word? Can't we just use the word market value and the people within the office can then consider depreciation as part of market value? I guess in my world that it seems like we might be overcomplicating that and creating an issue for you down the line when maybe we don't need to. Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crago, I think you could be right. I think what we were trying to do was make a good bill better. And the existing statute has a good definition of the contributory value, and it seemed like the intent was to have no doubt in what the meaning of contributory value was. And so we were just trying to follow that logic. The definition, I think, is very standard and probably is an okay omission from the draft bill if you'd like to move forward with it. Our appraisal staff, as you're aware, are very black and white, and they'd like to know exactly what the legislative intent was as they go forward in this process. So they probably would like to keep a definition in there so that they're crystal clear in their understanding.
follow up, Mr. Chairman. So Deputy Director, I guess I don't mind the idea of including market value or changing the definition from contributory to market value, because I agree, I think contributory is also complicated. I like the idea of market. I guess my question to you more is, could we just say market value versus depreciated market value? Could we just, and then we could come up with, I think we're gonna have some work between now and when we hit the floor, because I don't think we can pass this particular bill without also amending 36.9.105. Otherwise, we're gonna have conflicting language within the green books. So it might be an amendment we don't necessarily get to today, or we figure out something else to do. But that's my question to you. Could we just use the terminology market value versus depreciated market value?
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, yes, I believe you could. What we are trying to do is provide you with a good option outside of contributory value. So if the policy decision of the committee is to utilize that, then that's a fine addition or change to make there. I don't think we have negative impacts one way or another with that.
Do we have a definition for market value somewhere? And that's the other part. We did have, you just gave us a definition of depreciate. I mean, we kind of know what it means, but if it isn't spelled out in statute, it doesn't always mean the same. Do we have a,
Mr. Chairman, we can get
Definition?
one for you, yes.
okay, all right. Yes. Representative Almond.
Mr. Chairman, Deputy Director, on the same page, number 4, line 6, the word alternatively, why do we need that in there? Can't we stop, put the period at regulations and then the owner of the improvements? And just throw out that word alternatively?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we did not insert the word alternatively, so I'm not sure what the full intent of that is. I will say that what we try to promote in these situations is a negotiation between the two parties, the old lessee and the new lessee. And so I believe the beginning part of this paragraph may be alluding to that those two individuals need to come up with this specific type of a value as the improvements are changed hands. And in the alternative, should there not be an agreement, perhaps the second part of the paragraph then goes into how a more formal process could take place and how that value is considered then. And I'm just offering that as speculation.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Representative Davis.
Director Crowder, I do have one question there on a lot of these projects that these landowners seem to put on these lands. There's also a component from different grants or partners. How is that evaluated into that fair market value? Say you've got something from the NRCS or something from the BLM that has helped cost sharing these projects with you. And, you know, the owner is using that money to offset with the other money to get a bigger and better project. What's the process of evaluating that, I guess is my question.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Davis, that does happen quite often with the expense of these improvements these days. Federal cost share programs are rather good in some of these cases. We identify each of those when we provide them to the board for ultimate approval of the improvement before it's built. We indicate how much the lessee is putting into the improvement and how much cost share and from whom that cost share is coming. If we get into a situation that the draft bill alludes to, then we would deduct that cost share from another entity from the actual value, and the lessee would only be eligible for the amount less whatever some other entity put into it, just his costs.
Thank you.
So Representative Craigo might have an clear answer to my question on definition of market.
I just pulled up the definition of fair market value from the tax statutes, which it's not perfect. And I'm not sure it's the one we would necessarily want to use. We could use it, but it's fair market value means the amount in cash or terms reasonably equivalent to cash a well-informed buyer is justified in paying for a property and a well-informed seller is justified in accepting. And that's 3911-101, which could work, but it's more geared to actual real property versus improvements, which is oftentimes considered personal property. Depends on what type of improvement it is, I guess.
Thank you. So there aren't any more questions right now. Appreciate coming forward and the information that you've given us, and I'm ready for more public comment. Mr. Magagna, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association. As you're aware, Mr. Chairman, we've been very involved with the development of these bills with the previous Ag Committee and are very supportive of moving forward with them. I would first like to take a moment to thank all of you for agreeing to serve on this committee. I would say it's exciting to me to sit here and find that virtually every one of you has some previous ties or some passion for agriculture in the state of Wyoming. And gives me hope that we may have one of the strongest ag legislatures that I've seen in my many years of engagement, given all of the new legislators on, the fact that both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate are ag producers, and we're excited about the opportunity to do positive things that can benefit our industry going forward. And one of those things is this series of changes in the statutes with regard to state lands that you're considering today and will be considering in other bills, assuming that they are introduced. Specific to this bill, we're very supportive of this, both the necessary increase in the values and getting rid of that very challenging term of contributory value. And just as a side note, the example I often use when talking about that, I happen to be a sheep producer. If I have a set of good sheep corrals on my state lease, that has high contributive value. It may be essential to my operation. If you're acquiring a lease to run your cattle on, it may be more of a negative burden than it is a value. So I think that term was just very difficult to deal with. We're fine with the bill the way it is. I certainly do like the idea of getting rid of the word depreciated, because I think that implies, even though it may not always be true, that values have diminished. A suggestion for your consideration might be striking depreciated and just inserting the word current, so that we're focused on current market value. And from our perspective, I think we don't need to get into creating another definition and cluttering up the statutes with that. I think there's enough history of what current market value is out there that can be utilized here. But with that change, and certainly have no problem with changing applicant, I would recommend retaining the word alternatively or some similar term there to make it clear that if the owner decides to remove the improvements, then the whole discussion about value goes away, because if the owner removes the improvements, the new lessee or the applicant is not obligated to pay anything. So I think there's a value in somehow segregating those two sections. With that, Mr. Chairman, we fully support this bill, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee questions? Yes, go ahead, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Magagna, going back to the depreciated versus market versus current, are you proposing that we use the terminology current market or just current, or do you have a feeling about that if it was just said market?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Craigo, I would be inclined at this point to say current market, simply because that is more definitive. Current value could be based on any number of factors, and you could argue about which are the correct ones, where if you say current market, I think that's pretty well narrows it down.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McGagnon. Other testimony? Come on up, Mr. Moline.
Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Thank you for this opportunity. Sitting in support of this bill, I think even, the dollar value came up with $4,000. That still isn't going to build a mile of fence, but it's a lot better than where we were. So I can settle for the $4,000. To get into what you call it, the value of the improvement, depreciated doesn't work, because if you're depreciating it one way, well, the value is zero. If you're depreciating in another way, it could appreciate. But I think just having market value, which should take into account what the current conditions are, cost of materials, labor, et cetera. So either market value, current market value would seem to be, to me, a little redundant, because the market should be reflecting what is going on now. But either market value or current market value would be much better than depreciated. So sitting in support of the bill, and would sit for any questions the committee may have for me.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Moline. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll close comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? This would be the time you say move the bill.
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Moved by Representative Craigo, seconded by Representative Slagle. Committee, do you have alterations you'd like to make on the bill? Yeah. Representative Davis.
Mr. Chair, I would like to strike depreciated and put in their current market value. And then also under line 4, page 4, line 4, strike the new leasee and put improvements and the applicant. So the new applicant, so I just strike leasee. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I think you're gonna want to strike new and lessee. Applicant is a defined term.
Okay,
Probably.
stand corrected. Strike new and
All right.
lessee.
So line 4 would read improvements and applicant, and the applicant.
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion, committee? So are we clear on the amendment? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chairman Eklund, I missed.
Okay. The,
He wanted to strike depreciated and put something else. What was
right,
that?
so we are on page 4.
Correct.
That really helps our secretaries if we
Page
get
4, line
right to
2.
the, yep.
Page 4, line 2, sir. Strike depreciated and insert current market.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then,
On line 4, strike new leasee and insert applicant.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you need a second on that?
yes.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Davis and seconded by Representative Conrad that we strike depreciated and put in current market value on line 2, and then we're on page 4. Page 4 also, line 4, strike new leasee and put in applicant. Any further discussion, committee? Yes, Representative Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. McGagny recommended that we also include, maintain the term alternatively there. And there's been some consideration to remove that. So I just would want to retain that if possible with this motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I agree with Representative Winter as well.
okay. You got me a little confused. Are we leaving alternatively in there or
Yes,
taking it out?
leaving.
Okay, all right. So we leave it alone. All right. Okay, any further discussion? Representative Schlegel.
Mr. Chairman, do we need to add a definition at the bottom there for current market value?
I don't think so. I think, you're the attorney here. We've got it in statute and you were able to find it rather quickly. I think we might be okay on it.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Magagna, who testified that he does not believe we need to put a define the term within the statute itself. Market value is a term of art. It's used within the industry. I don't think we need to include one at this point.
All right. Let me turn this back on. Any further discussion? All right, let's go ahead and vote on that amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, committee, any further changes? So we had one more suggestion. I'm not just sure how we fit it in, but we've done it before, and that's on 36-9105. And that pertains to the reassignment of a lease to someone else and the valuation in which this same language eventually needs to be adopted. And I believe we could just amend that in. I'm not sure I've ever done this quite before. I know we do it on legislation because trying to make the statute all consistent. What do you think, Vice Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, we might run into a little bit of a constitutional issue on the short title and the definition within the bill itself, because it only pertains to leasing and the other statute actually pertains to sale. So I'm not sure how we would do that. The easiest solution would be, if we thought we could get it done, is just have a quick bill draft done by one of us as an individual, run it through the committee so that at the end of session, you have matching language. I think that's going to be the simplest, to be honest.
That's kind of what I was thinking we might do. Committee, would you be okay with that if Representative Craigo and I put together a quick bill and got your signatures on us, got you to sign on to it, and then we'd have statute conforming with itself?
Yes, sir.
And thank you for calling that to our attention.
Mr. Chair, do we need a vote on that, or do we?
No, we'll just try to get it put together and on time. Okay, no further changes?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Representative Banks.
It was brought to my attention by the good gentleman from the Farm Federation. Where was the amount of $4,000 brought up? Because he brought up that it doesn't build much fence. I don't see it as doing much for corrals or really anything. What was the purpose behind the 4,000 amount, if I might ask?
I think I can answer that. We're trying to stay in line with inflation. This bill will only deal with the things that the leasee will be doing on his own without the approval of state lands. So you have a well that goes out, you'll go to state lands and they'll quickly approve something and you'll get something done with the state engineer. You have the pump go out and you just need to go get one. It's going to be maybe up to $1,000. I doubt if it'll be that high yet, although the way things are going. So we were just trying to up those values because it's time again to do it. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would just maybe ask members of the committee what their thoughts on, is that an adequate amount of funding or an adequate level to have that amount put at?
Committee. Okay, we'll start at the end there.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that was based on some modeling that was done by the director and/or his agency with regards to the $4,000 value that we currently see. Is that my understanding correct? That the 4,000, that was a threshold that aligns ourselves with 2023?
I think so. I think that's what we were trying to work on. Representative Schlegel?
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think 4,000 is a good number because basically this is a number that landowners can spend without asking permission of the state land board. And I think 4,000, like Chairman Eklund had mentioned earlier, we have a pump go out on a well that we got on the state land. I know pumps I've just bought recently are like $2,500 plus whatever your labor is. So you're looking at somewhere in that range. It's under the 4,000, but it's above what the current statute says. So I think it works at 4,000 right now.
Okay. Yes, Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, so it seems to me that we're basically talking about $4,000 as a trigger point to involve state lands. Is that correct? Could you run us through that process once you are involved? How long that takes, for the landowners to achieve a ruling?
Go ahead, Deputy Crowder, when you.
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. The process is we have an application process. There's an application on our website. Lessees need to fill it out and submit it to the office anytime they're doing an improvement above the threshold, whatever it is. There are often times when a lessee needs to move rather quickly or has a crew ready to go or needs a pump, as the example here is, and needs to go to the store right now. We're not going to move that fast, but we do have a pre-approval process where if we get an application in, we can do a quick review within a few days and provide you with, or provide the lessee with a pre-approval letter saying that we agree that the improvement is prudent to the management of state lands. It's a good improvement to put on the land. Go ahead and go forward. However, the approval is subject to ultimate board approval. So we're still going to send the improvement to the board for ratification. You can just move forward with that pre-approval letter, understanding it's subject to ultimate board approval, and there could be some risk there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Representative Banks?
Quick question while we got you here. So say I've got a lease and my reservoir washes out. I call down in, it's gonna take $6,000. Do I get that immediate approval? Yeah, go ahead and do it, but we're gonna pass it through the board for that final approval. Do I understand correctly?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I think the intent of raising it to today's market value is to try to cover some of those emergency situations where you wouldn't need to come in. So if the breach of the dam would only cost $3,500, and today you'd still have to come and talk to us, but if the bill's passed, you wouldn't have to.
Okay. All right, committee. Thank you, sir. So I don't think there's any further discussion. I believe we're ready for a roll call vote on this bill. This is House Bill 16, state land leasing improvements.
Representative Alderman,
Aye.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Banks,
Aye.
Representative Conrad,
Aye.
Representative Crago,
Aye.
Representative Davis,
Aye.
Representative Slagle,
Aye.
Representative Winter,
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye. Okay, that,
The vote is 9 ayes and 0 noes.
thank you.
Bill passes.
All right, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 17, state lands grazing of non-owned livestock. And, I think I'll do it kind of like I did the last time and try to explain why we brought the bill. Like I said before, we're trying to clear up things, policy decisions that the state lands has to make that make their job somewhat confusing. one of those confusing catch parts has been what constitutes a leasee raising non-owned animals, somebody else's cows, and a sublease. And I think this bill is trying to clear that part up. What's a sublease? And in many of the cases where the discrepancy lies, there is no subleasing that goes on. And we're going to ask the definition of subleasing and the difference between non-owned livestock and a sublease on state lands as we go through this. I think we're going to start with state lands, and you may come up and tell us what current policy is and give us your input.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Current policy within the office and longstanding practice is that anytime livestock are run on a parcel of state land that are not owned by the lessee, that would constitute a sublease. And that would trigger the need to get approval by the board to submit that sublease to the office for review and to for us to understand if compensation is traded in that agreement, if it exceeds what's being paid to the state or is otherwise termed excess rental, and if half of that excess rental needs to be submitted to the office above what the existing lease fee is. That happens on a day-to-day basis in our office. It's a relatively normal function for us. In fact, when we ran the numbers, we process anywhere from 375 to 400 subleases each year. It's an active program within our office. The thing that kind of gets to be a sticking point with subleases is that the existing statute indicates that if you don't get those subleases or agreements approved by the board, then the lease could be subject for cancellation. And that's not something that we do during the term of the lease. When we understand the situation is present, we work with the lessee to try to get them an approved sublease and work them through the process. And if they don't respond, I suppose we have the stick of lease cancellation, but we've not ever had to use that as a stick. The problem comes in lease renewal times. If we don't know there's a sublease on the lease and the property is up for renewal every 10 years and it's made aware to us, we are made aware of it at the time of renewal, there may not be enough time for us to correct that situation before the expiration of the lease. And in that case, we understand that there is a sublease on the property that's not approved. We consider that an illegal sublease. And then we also consider that existing lessee ineligible to exercise a preferential right to match another's bid at that point. And that's really where the conflict for subleasing comes in, is in that period of time. And I think that's what the bill is intending to alleviate, is some of those conflicts that we see at that period of time. Mr. Chairman, that's how we currently operate in the sublease world. I'm happy to talk more about the bill if you'd like.
We might have some questions. Any questions from the committee? Okay, if you have more to talk on the bill, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we reviewed the bill with our Attorney General staff, and they raised a point, and I'm just going to offer it for the committee to think about. But inside of the bill, page 2, line 14, it indicates that a lessee of state land doesn't need to get approval by the director prior to allowing livestock onto the lease. They indicated that that could be a timing issue, meaning that do they still need to get approval, just not prior to livestock coming on? And so they raised that as a question, and it would be a problem for our interpretation going forward.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Does the committee understand what he's saying? Okay. Okay. We might not be doing quite what we wanted to do with it, is what he's saying, I think. Go ahead, Representative Schlegel.
Mr. Chairman, and Director. Question would be, do you have language change that you would recommend for this?
Mr. Chairman, we do. We could provide that you would strike on line 14, starting with under, strike under this subsection prior to allowing. And in place of that strike, simply add the word allow.
So we'd strike that part, comma after director, and allow livestock the leasee doesn't own. Got it, committee? Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, to further discuss the bill, the placement of the addition into the statute indicates that this practice would not be subject to the half excess rental. We see that as a negative, possible negative impact to revenue on state lands. As I mentioned, this is an active program with roughly 400 subleases approved and analyzed each year. That equates to roughly $1 million in revenue each year just from excess rental. It's important to note that the whole grazing and agriculture program in our office generates $6.3 million on an annual basis back to the state's trust beneficiaries. So the $1 million equates to roughly a 16% portion of the grazing and agricultural revenue stream back to the state. So any change that would be different than current practice, meaning that some agreements don't need to be approved by the office and we don't need to analyze them for excess rental, could have a negative impact to that 16% revenue stream.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, those were all the comments that we had for the bill. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Director. So you just said if we interpret this as not requiring the 1/2 additional payment, 1/2 of the above whatever the lessee is paying to the state, around $1 million, is that based on digging into all of those payments? I mean, do we know it's $1 million? We're just saying it could be up to $1 million. Do we have any idea? Because a lot of these you're still going to end up with, they're not going to have control, right? They're actually subleasing it. A lot of these, they're not doing, for example, a share agreement or something with somebody else they might know, they're running cows for somebody on shares, et cetera, which would constitute control of the livestock. They're actually turning the lease over to someone who's coming in, running on their entire ranch, most likely, or portion of it. Are we able to differentiate that out to know exactly what that dollar figure is?
And Mr. Chairman and Representative Craigo, we can't do that right now. Like I mentioned in our office, we simply understand that anybody else's livestock running on the lease that's not the lessee constitutes a sublease, and that's how we categorize it, and that's how we track it in our databases and provide it to the board for approval. We do keep track of all of the excess rental that is in each one of those agreements. So we can tell you on an annual, quarterly, or whatever basis you'd like, how much money all of those agreements are. But without going into each and every agreement and possibly only being able to do that looking forward, we can't tell you exactly the impact of non-owned livestock, yet the lessee maintains management, what that impact would be.
And we're going to get into further discussion of what other opinions on subleasing. So why don't we continue on? Thank you. Other public comment? Mr. McGagnon, come on up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And by way of a bit of background, this bill was brought to the previous Joint Ag Committee by Wyoming Stockholders Association to address what we see as a very confusing issue out there. And I may back up just a little bit. philosophy here. What does it mean to hold a grazing lease on state trust lands? It means you are authorized to harvest the forage off of that land with your species of livestock, and you assume a responsibility to do that in a manner that protects the land and hopefully enhances it through the way you operate that. Beyond that, it seems that to us that that's what the interest of the state land office is, the interest of the beneficiaries, that you're doing that. Whether the livestock that I graze are my own or some portion or all of them are someone else's, as long as I'm the person that has that responsibility, I'm the one that's managing those livestock, caring for them, we see as immaterial to the purpose of leasing state trust lands. And to say that because I brought someone else's livestock on, that I have to share something of what I got would be the equivalent to us of saying, because Representative Crago sold his cattle for more than I sold mine, he should share a part of that additional revenue with the state land trust beneficiaries. As long as I'm doing what I leased the land for, we view that it's immaterial who owns the livestock. It's who's managing the livestock, who's caring for them, who's responsible for what happens on those state lands. And that's the reason for bringing this forward. As far as I just grabbed the wrong bill. As far as the revenue portion of this, there's if you look at the existing statute, and if I might take just a moment, beginning on page 2, line 1, it says, if the lessee shall assign, sublease, or contract, all or part of the lease area, then you need prior approval. And we would grant that an interpretation, which has been the interpretation of the state land office, that bringing in other livestock constitutes some type of a contract, or that is arguable. It's what we're trying to clear up with this legislation. But if you go down and read the sentence that begins on line 10, provided that in no event shall the lands be subleased unless 1/2 of the excess revenue is paid to the state, that is far more narrow than the first part. It doesn't refer to any contract or assignment. It only refers to a sublease. And in the research that I've done, Mr. Chairman, of all the legal definitions of a sublease that I can find, just bringing on someone else's livestock does not constitute a sublease. So we would contend that that particular provision on excess rental has been for some time applied inappropriately given the definition of a sublease. And for example, if on my ranch has private land, it has state land. If my bringing other livestock on the state land is deemed sublease, then have I subleased my private land by bringing on other livestock? And I don't think anyone would maintain that I have done that. So we think this is a necessary clarification. We understand the financial implications that may exist to it. I just recently had requested the state land office an answer to the question that Representative Crago posed. How much revenue do you derive from these arrangements, and how much of that is due to arrangements that strictly involve bringing in other people's livestock? And I think it's important to look at what our industry is like today. 40, 50 years ago, that was not very common. You raised your livestock on your place. Today, what we're seeing in our industry, partly driven by financial considerations, partly driven by drought considerations. If this year I sell off part of my breeding herd because of a severe drought, and 2 years from now, all of a sudden I have a great crop of forage, I can't replace that breeding herd in 1 year. It may take 4 or 5 years. So my response is to say, well, meanwhile, to maintain a reasonable level of income, I will bring in someone else's livestock to run with mine. No impact, no change on the state land. I'm just making a financial decision. The other thing we're seeing much more of today is people who traditionally ranches or cow-calf operations have now gone to yearling operations, where they, rather than put up a lot of hay and get out and feed cows all winter long, they bring in pasture cattle for the summer. And they may own some of those. They may not own any of them. They bring in someone else's, but they're responsible for those cattle. They're managing them. And I know in visiting with a number of our members, and we had one testify to the Ag Committee at their meeting when this bill was being considered, if I get paid X number of dollars per head per month or per animal unit to run your livestock on my place, trying to break that down and determine, well, how much of that was for the forage, how much of it was for providing care and supervision, for the salt that I put out, for the veterinary treatment that I provide those animals, is a pretty impossible task. And then if I determine that through some methodology that, well, $8 of that was payment for the forage, then it comes down to, okay, what percentage of my ranch is state trust land? I have to figure that out. And if so, if all the water developments and the meadowlands are on my private land, the amount of time that those cattle are spending on the state land may be much less than proportionally than what they're on my private land. So it creates a challenge that I've had many landowners tell me, we sit there and play with numbers, and if we had to, we couldn't defend the number we came up with because it's such an arbitrary process. So for all of those reasons, we came forward with this request to recognize that just running livestock that don't have my brand on them, and that was literally a case that happened here in Laramie County a couple years ago, where a third party who wanted to obtain a lease took a picture of the cattle and took it over to the brand office and found out who that brand was registered to, and came back and laid a claim that the longtime family lessee of 3 generations or more had violated their state lease because they found animals on there that didn't have a brand registered to them. And it doesn't work in today's real world, and we're trying to get back to a real world. And certainly there may be other ways to compensate for whatever lost revenue here if we knew how much that was, but we don't believe this is the way to meet that obligation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly concur with the idea of dropping the reference to prior allowing that's been suggested as amendment to the bill. And one other minor item I would offer for your consideration. On line 16, page 2, I believe the original language had intended to say the lessee retains full management responsibility. And management and responsibility is maybe a little bit confusing there, since those two are part of the same, but that's not a minor thing. And either way, I think would be acceptable. Whether you strike the word "and" there or don't strike it. I think in our original intent, we just said management responsibility. With that, Mr. Chairman, would be happy to entertain any questions from members of the committee.
Questions, committee? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other public comment? Come on up, Marguerite.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and congratulations to all of you on your elections or re-elections, and a lot of new faces here. I'll introduce myself. My name is Marguerite Herman. I will be testifying in other venues for the League of Women Voters, but for Ag, I really put on the hat for, I represent I'm a member of a group called Advocates for School Trust Lands. And they represent advocacy for beneficiaries of school trust lands in mostly western states, because that's about all the states that have any trust lands left over from when we were admitted as, and actually Wyoming still has most of its land left that we were given in trust at statehood. So what I do is I revert to active admission and our state constitution as far as the fiduciary duty assigned and accepted by the state. When we got the money as the grantee, we said, yes, we will obey we'll abide by the duties of a trustee, the fiduciary duties for this land, which is to make money for common schools. That's, and it's the language is very clear in our constitution. And so assuming that, putting on that, I would say that, and I understand the arguments made that it's hard to compute, and the amount lost is not much, and it's hard to figure that out. And it's hard to say how much money is being made over and above the money paid per AUM and the money that's received from the person who owns the cattle. But by any definition, I think it is subleasing. And I think Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry, excuse me. I would say that Mr. Crowder explained that there is a process for handling subleases. It works, and it does produce an estimated $1 million for common schools. And so it does carry out the fiduciary duty for the school trust lands. And I would argue that getting money over and above what is being paid to the state is subleasing, and it's making it a certain amount of money that is determinable and is should come under the subleasing provisions of their state statutes. And so I would argue that, I mean, it may be difficult and it may be inconvenient, but I think who's in charge of the cattle is less important than the fact that it is a sublease. And we have a competent agency who's handling those things, and I think fairly. And so I guess I would just oppose the bill as being contrary to the interests of the beneficiaries of this trust lands, contrary to the trustee status of the state. So.
Committee, questions for Mrs. Herman? Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
I'd like to offer a little bit more discussion on this, but if I'm not mistaken, the state sections that we're talking about generally are not fenced, at least in our part of the country. So if they were all fenced, then it would be easy to preclude that. So the fencing of that state section, is that the leasee's responsibility or the state of Wyoming's responsibility?
it's a responsibility of the leasee, I
Leasee.
think in all cases, isn't it?
So then you would go to the state for funding to fence off that? No.
No.
So then, in reference to Mr. Magagna there, when you're running on your, i.e. BLM lease, there's no way in your grazing rotation that you could actually preclude that ground unless you fenced it out. So it'd be a phenomenal cost to the rancher to fence that out. I understand right now it's probably about $10,000 a mile to fence. And then being you're adjoining a BLM section, you'd have to fall under their criteria with your fencing. It seems pretty convoluted for what we're talking about here to try and preclude this out of my grazing rotation. Does that make any sense at all? So since we don't have fences around these sections, I think the manager of this livestock, whether it be his or someone else's that he's leasing, it only makes sense that he's just buying the AUMs off that state section for that short amount of time, whatever that duration of that period is. Whether it's his cow or the one that he's got leased as he's going through his grazing rotation.
Yes.
That's my thought on that.
All right, so we do have a question here, so Mr. Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Davis, as Mr. Magagna mentioned, it can be complicated. And as you referenced, it can be easy, depending on fences and improvements and how the ownership lies around the property. We have all scenarios that we review daily, and we work with the lessees to understand exactly what's happening. We try to get all of the agreements that they have so we can read them and get a good sense of how our state land lies within them. But the fencing component is a good example of one of the complexities. Location of water is a good example of one of the complexities. Just topography is another good example of some of the complexities. So that all goes into our analysis when we're trying to determine how much of the cost of that sublease is actually attributable to the state land, or is it just to the neighbor's land? And how much of the benefit, and it all goes into the mix. So I'm not gonna say it's not complicated, but we do have good staff that do this daily. They have good communication with the lessees to understand what's happening, and they do try to find a fair number as far as a value attributable to the state land, and not just have a very black and white formula going forward. And I'm not sure if I answered your question, because you did provide a very complicated question. Right.
Okay,
Thank you for trying to decipher that.
right. Thank you, sir. Any further testimony? Mr. Moline?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline with Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation again. This bill, as outlined by Mr. McGagna, is needed and necessary. As far as the new language, I know the full management and responsibility. Yeah, to be quite honest, I don't know what that means. I would suggest to just call it retains management. Because responsibility gets way beyond what you're actually, responsible for the sales of it, how you market it. Is that part of the responsibility? To me, the management covers what you're wanting, the day-to-day management of that animal. Do they get out? You get them back in, you feed them. So I think management is the key word there, not responsibility. Management implies some responsibilities for the actions that's within your purview. So I think having that full responsibility is kind of unneeded. So just management should be that word in there. With that, Mr. Chairman, committee, I would sit for any questions you may have for me.
Questions, committee? Thank you. Further testimony? Okay, we'll close the public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, go ahead. I'd like to make amendment as previously.
We got to move the bill first.
Let's
Moved
move the
and
bill.
seconded. Okay, moved and seconded by Representative Davis. Okay, now we'll work the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to amend the bill, specifically page 2, line 14, striking under this subsection prior to, replaced with allow. And finally, row 16, striking and responsibility.
Okay,
Yes, and I apologize. Thank you, Representative Slagle. Within line 15 on page 2, we should probably delete the allowing.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
okay,
I'll second that amendment.
okay, it's been moved and seconded. So a question I guess I would have as we chewed through this thing on line 16, the word full management, whether we just need retains management. And the reason I say that is we got into it when we started talking about the word responsibility. And does this livestock owner have no responsibility at all? I would guess he has his own mineral program that he'll want the land manager to use and some other things. So I'm not sure we want the word full. I'd like to throw that out as a possibility, removing the word full as well, but Representative Conrad.
Mr. Chairman, my interpretation with full places that management solely on the leasee, not who he subleased to, if that makes sense. That whole responsibility is residing with him, not who he subleased to, thus the full. That's my understanding of that.
Be right. Okay, Representative Allemond.
Mr. Chairman, on line 16, I would like to strike out both the word full and the word and. So it would read, the leasee retains management responsibility to graze on the lands. Thank you.
Okay, so we'd be modifying, go ahead, Representative Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think we're muddying the waters here. I mean, at some point, I mean, what amount of responsibility and management, I think we got to keep the word responsibility in there, but that's just me. I don't know if we need the word "and," but I think we need the word responsibility. At what point is it no longer a sublease? Do you only have to retain 1% of management responsibility? Do you only have, I mean, we're talking about a very discrete issue here, right? We're trying to narrow this down so that the landowner, the lessee, the state lands lessee who runs someone else's cattle and provides the labor and management of those cattle is not considered a sublease. We're not talking about a guy who runs out and maybe checks the water once in a while, but then the sub lessee, the actual owners of the cows, does everything else. So are we creating an issue here that gets really difficult for state lands, and also the one we're not trying to address? And I think we're broadening the terms of the bill dramatically when we start taking out those words regarding full management responsibility. I think we have to be careful where we go. I'm not going to be supportive of taking out all of that language. I actually like the word, and I'm not sure full is necessarily required, but some delineator there has to be in there. Otherwise, literally 1% management could be considered to fulfill the purposes of what we're addressing here. And I don't think that's where we're trying to go either.
Representative Alderman.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I wanted to take out the word full was because if the owner of these cattle come and check them periodically, all of a sudden the lease, he is taking over part of the management if he does nothing more than drives out and checks them. So, and that's why I worried about the word full, because if they're required to do full management, if he goes checks those cows, all of a sudden he did not do full management. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Representative Schlegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would agree with Representative Crago. I think we probably need to leave full management responsibility in there as well. I would disagree with Representative Ellerman. I think if we had somebody's cattle on our place, we were managing them, the owner wanted to come to look, it would be more of a just checking to make sure we're doing the correct management. It wouldn't be a management position. We're still retaining full management, but they can come see how we're managing them for them, I guess is that way I would see it.
Representative Conrad.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in listening to my fellow representatives, I'm in agreement that 16 should remain as it states and withdraw that previous strike of and responsibility. So retaining the full line 16 would be my proposal after listening to our fellow representatives.
Okay, so you'd modify it, still leave the line 14 allow?
Yes.
That part would
14
stay
is
in. Would the
allow.
second be okay? Were you the second? You'd be okay with that change? You were the second? Okay. So that's what, we're not done yet, so we'll make it clear before one of the things, I think we have time, a little bit of time. One of the reasons this came to us is we have some cases where forget who, I think Mr. McGagnon mentioned, and it was right near here, and I know the people. They gotten into a dispute over their grazing lease, and it happened about the time they were renewing the 10-year lease. And someone came in and wanted to bid on this land, on this state land. And it's common with this other ranch, most of it would have to be fenced, or a great deal of it would. The understanding I got from the attorneys involved in this is that a sublease and non-owned livestock are two very separate things. That's the sublease constitutes the removal of the management part of it. And that's why we're trying to bring this forward. The end result, we've got another bill that'll be helpful, I think, in situations like that, because I'm not sure policy has been terribly clear on what state lands can and can't do or how they need to operate. We've got attorneys around the state that seem to think they know how they should have operated, but without this in policy, I'm in favor of it, probably leaving it alone the way it is. If we muddy it up too much, we'll just do harm to the bill. But I don't think the amount of money exchanged in this is going to make a significant amount of difference, because I don't think it's $1 million. We're talking about all of the actual, what attorneys tell me is a sublease and what is not a sublease. The difference between those two probably isn't anywhere near $1 million. So that's what brought the thing along, and we're going to have another bill or two that will hopefully help state lands make some of the decisions they make. But the end result, if we don't do this, I think there'd be lessees that are going to, instead of renewing an application for their lease, will end up paying attorney's fees to try to maintain the lease. And the one that's close by here, I'm almost certain that looking at that lease situation, it's 40 acres here, 103 acres here, and all of that, trying to fence that out would just be, it'll probably go back to that original leasee, only he's going to spend a lot of an attorney's fee if he's trying to retain it, and I think this would help it. So, so with that,
Mr. Chair,
any further? Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to remodify that just a little bit and remove the word "and" in there and just have it say management responsibilities.
Okay.
Representative Conrad?
Representative Davis, I can live with that.
All right, any other discussion? So the amendment before us, oh, we got more. Representative Schlegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe earlier we crossed off allowing and just put allow in there. Reading through that here several times as we've been going through this, I think we still need it to say allowing. The approval of the director allowing livestock the lessee does not own, I think should be the way that will read.
Okay. Grammatical correction. So, you have some, go ahead, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, Representative Slagle, I'm not sure that's correct. So if we use the words "to allow" on line 14, I think it reads correctly. So it'll read, "A lessee of state lands whose lease authorizes grazing on the state land shall not be required to obtain the approval of the director to allow livestock the lessee does not own, but for which the lessee retains full management responsibility, comma, to graze the lands."
I would agree with that. Thank you.
Okay. So have you got our amendment written down, do you think? Go ahead and run by what you've got.
Can I read it back to you?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. So as I understand, line 14, you would like it, line 14, to read the approval of the director to allow, strike under this subsection prior. Is that correct?
Prior to allowing, correct? Prior to allowing.
Prior is still in there then. Okay?
No, it's not. Strike prior to allowing. Out to allow livestock is how that would read. So we would take out under this, the words we'd take out are under this subsection prior to allowing. Those would be crossed out. Okay. Got it? And
And are you, so then,
let's go with the rest of the sentence, make sure we,
sorry, I'm sorry, Chairman, but if we strike out under this subsection prior to allowing, then it reads, starting on line 14, the approval of the director, and then it goes to line 15.
No,
Livestock.
Director to allow.
after director,
To allow.
to allow,
Okay,
would be inserted in there.
good, thank you.
Livestock the leasee does not own, but for which the leasee retains full management and responsibility. Take, which one are we taking out then? And retains full management responsibility, comma, to graze on the lands.
Correct.
Okay. Is the committee clear? All right. Okay, well, this is a good exercise because I don't want to fix it on the House floor. It's better that we try to come there with a clean bill. You have very many, especially committee bills. So I think I'll make sure we've got it.
The only thing I have left is, as I understand, striking under the subsection prior and adding, leaving to, or crossing out allowing and put to allow.
Yes.
That was motion by
Representative Conrad.
Conrad.
We've modified it a few times. I think
And-
we're still under
and
Robert's
seconded
rules.
by,
And by Representative Davis, right? Representative Banks, I'm sorry.
Banks. Okay. And then crossing out and on line 16, where it says full management, and then it would just be responsibility, comma. We had that as Conrad? Davis?
Yeah, that was part of the same motion, I think. Yep.
Davis and seconded by?
No, by Conrad and
Banks.
Banks, the same, it was,
Same.
it's all the same amendment. So
Okay,
we're gonna
great.
vote on this thing pretty quick here.
Good.
Is the committee clear on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we're voting on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, the amendment passes. Any further discussion on the bill? Yes, Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got two amendments. I'm going to do them separately just because the first one's super easy. The first one on line 17, where it says the word lands, I think we should insert the word state before that because it's that those two words go together everywhere else within the statute. So that would be my amendment.
Okay, and we're going to do it in separate ones. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Seconded by Slagle. Any further discussion on that amendment?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would like Representative Trego now to read that line for me, okay? Go ahead and read that last line.
Graze on the state lands,
Graze on the state lands or on state lands? Is it
the state lands.
the state lands? Okay, thank you.
We clear? All those in favor of that amendment, say aye.
Aye.
I should have asked the secretary if you're good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. We'll talk afterwards, make sure we are. Okay, another one.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. My second amendment is really just making a statement of the policy choice we're making today because I still don't think the language is particularly clear on that. What we're saying is these particular types of arrangements do not constitute subleases. And I think we need to specifically set that forth within the statute. And so my second amendment would be line 17, strike the period at the end of the sentence, insert a comma, and then insert the following language. And such use of the state lands shall not be considered a sublease, period.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Prego, seconded by Representative Allemand, to strike the period, put a comma, don't necessarily need a comma because we're putting and next, and such use of the, continue on, I didn't get it all written out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And such use of the state lands shall not be considered a sublease.
Okay.
I just think that gives the little bit of discussion, Mr. Chairman. I just think that gives the director and the deputy directors really what our intent is, because it's not necessarily in there. I think you could still read that statute without that clause to say the 1/2 rental still applies. It's just, you don't have to get the permission. You can pay it after the fact. And that's not what we're really trying to do here. We're saying the 1/2 rental addition does not apply in these particular circumstances. And so I just want it to be clear in the bill that that's what we're doing. And so that it'll be clear for the body too, when we get to the floor, they understand exactly what we're doing. This is a policy choice. I mean, we're gonna have some arguments against it, and we heard some of them today, and those are valid arguments, but we need to be able to discuss those when we get to the floor.
Hey, thank you. Any further discussion on it?
Chairman Eklund,
Yes,
could I read that back as I understand? it?
yep, go ahead and read it back.
Starting on line 17, graze on state lands, strike the period, put a comma there. And such use of the state lands shall not be considered sublease.
A sublease.
A sublease.
A sublease, okay?
Mhm. And I think it's probably a good idea, especially for us to clarify what we're trying to say in statute and what we're trying to do. So thank you. I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor say aye on this amendment.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Any further discussion or changes to the bill? I believe we're ready to vote, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman. Voting on HB, House Bill 17, Representative Alleman.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Craigo.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Slagle.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Ayes are 9, noes are 0. The bill passes with amendments.
All right. Thank you, committee. And we'll have more work. It'll start Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock.